click. And we're live. It is Thursday, November 11th. That's Armistice Day, Veterans Day, you know, the day we all sing La Marseillaise. 5:01 p.m.
Polish Independence Day.
It is Polish Independence Day.
Independence Day.
Yeah. How about Estonia, Toomas?
No, but we celebrate Polish Independence Day.
Excellent. 5:01 p.m. Happy Independence Day to the people of Poland. Congratulations to the French on prevailing in World War I. And a warm, happy Veterans Day to veterans all over the United States. It is 5:02 p.m. Eastern Time in New York and New Haven and Washington, D.C. It is 11 p.m. Poland time. Is that right, Anne? Yeah. And it is midnight Estonia time. Is that right, Toomas? And we are here to talk migration, Belarus, the get-riddable Alexander Lukashenko, and migrants in Poland, or trying to get into Poland. So, Anne, get us started. You were actually at the Belarusian Polish border today. Bring us up to speed. What's going on?
It was actually a day ago, but yes, we're in the middle of a very strange crisis. And the crisis is a crisis that was created by the Belarusian government, which is literally importing migrants from the Middle East, or migrants or people or refugees. I don't know what the correct word is. I want to use something respectful, but people who come from Iraq, who come from Syria, who come from Yemen and other places, is offering them visas and plane trips, often at very high prices, to fly to Minsk. When they arrive in Minsk, they have hotels that have been booked in advance, and they're then offered rides to the border. And the rides to the border sometimes are taxis or drivers, and sometimes they are soldiers, or sometimes people in uniform. Not everybody's able to say. Once they arrive at the border, they discover that they have to cut the fence. And some people do it. They cut the fence. Some people want to go back. And when they want to go back to Minsk, they're blocked by men with guns who say you can't go back. And so we have a very bizarre phenomenon of people camping on the Polish-Belarusian border in between the two countries. It is now -4 degrees on the border, so it's freezing. These are people from the Middle East. They're not dressed. They're not prepared for this. Most of them were not told that this was part of the package. They imagined that this was some kind of easy passage to Germany or some easy passage to Europe, something easier than the Mediterranean route, which they know is dangerous. And they arrive and discover that that's not what they expected. On the other side, on the Polish side, we have the Polish government, which initially sought to use this circumstance for its benefit. We have a far-right government in Poland which sought to portray the migrants as terrorists, as evil, actually as sexual perverts. There was a Polish evening news segment which showed something that looked vaguely like a Middle Eastern person having sex with an animal, and this was shown as evidence that these are people on the border are doing this kind of thing. Later on, it turned out that was some kind of strange film that had been circulating on the internet since the 1970s. But so the government sought to use this and to show how tough they are. They're pushing back against this dangerous attack on Poland from the east. As a result, there's been a total collapse of order in the situation. In fact, many thousands of people have made it through this corridor and they've made it to Germany. Many others are stuck in the border where they are camping in the cold. Some people have starved to death and died. there has grown up, in the absence of this kind of vacuum, there's no Polish government spokesman you can talk to about it. There's no information about what's happening. And so you've had this really amazing set of civic organizations arising from nothing, really, to help, I mean, really just prevent people from dying, bring food and blankets and so on to these people to help them figure out what to do next, and to somehow ease the situation. But it's one of the ugliest situations I can recall seeing in a long time. You have people who, I witnessed a Kurdish family, including very small children and an elderly woman who could barely walk, who were sitting on a forest floor. I don't know if they really knew where they were. This is it's a forest in eastern Poland. They don't speak English. They don't speak Polish. They don't know any Polish history. It's actually a forest with a long history of hosting partisan movements. And they're there, and I don't know what they expected, but they somehow thought they would be in Germany, and they're not. And they're surrounded by a strange combination of border guards who are themselves very confused about what to do. And as I said, these local activists who are very brave, but they're not professional, they're not professional humanitarian aid groups. And there's a vacuum and there's chaos. And it's always in situations when you have vacuums and chaos that you get terrible things happening. And we're all very worried there will be shooting, there will be some terrible incident that will happen in the next few days. It's ugly and it's accelerating.
Hello? I can talk. Okay. And also, I should add that Poland is most beset, but it actually began with Lithuania in August, since Lithuania has been most vocal about Belarus and hosts the head of not the nominal, but rather the probably elected head of state, Tihanovska, and they've also done it to a lesser degree with Latvia. And currently the worry is, and sort of vague threats have been made, that they will do the same thing to Ukraine, with the fourth country with which Belarus has a border. And of course there, the tensions are extremely high, have been ratcheted up to levels they have not been since 2014. In fact, the head of the CIA, Burns, was in Moscow a few days ago talking to his counterpart Patrushev, and apparently even spoke on the phone to Vladimir Putin, saying that don't do it, don't invade. And Putin apparently, at least according to press reports, said that he has to teach the Ukrainians a lesson. So we're dealing with a rather big powder keg at this moment. And then to look at the response of the European Union. Well, I mean, that's why I said, I hope we don't hear the expression deeply concerned here, because those were the initial responses, and that's been the standard response. But at least the president of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was a little tougher. And the foreign ministers should be meeting now soon, tomorrow, the day after, about taking steps with Belarus. And finally, I'll stop, is that the problem has been that the sanctions that were imposed on Belarus, on top of the long-term sanctions that have been there, but were upped with the hijacking of the plane with the journalist in the summer, is that EU member states up till now have claimed national cutouts on sanctions. Probably the most egregious is Austria, which is often the case. But anyway, Austria claimed a national cutout for Raiffeisenbank, an Austrian bank, which is the primary, if not almost only lender to Lukashenko, other than Russia, of course. And so, I mean, this is one reason why sanctions have had such a weak effect, because basically in the EU, everyone runs for their national cutouts. I mean, other people do it for potash, which is another export item. And it goes, I mean, just go through the member states. Too many of them have their own special interests.
Wait, Toomas just left? Oh,
nope, he's here.
Do you see that
I just accidentally vanished him for a moment.
Okay. Do you see that changing?
Maybe Anne can say.
Is that Poland, which has its own conflicts right now with everybody, actually, with America and Europe and the Czechs and, and the Germans and so on, has not requested European Union help, and there are systems in place that could help process migrants or could help send them back even. It has not asked for any help. It has not requested that, and has not really engaged in any international diplomacy. And so any diplomacy that's happened has been on the EU has taken it on itself. But the Polish government, which is essentially now isolated, it has very few friends in the world, has not made any efforts to make this into an international incident or situation. And that's, that's one of the only answers to this problem, is that you need all of Europe involved. You need certainly Poland's neighbors involved. You need some kind of process to deal with the immigrants, and not this ad hoc, local people running into the forest with cans of soup. And then they really refused to do that. And that's one of the things that's underlying this problem.
Are you sensing that this story is getting through? Because it definitely got, I mean, I'm an avid news consumer, but this struck me as being like of extreme importance. I was wondering if you're at least in Europe, you get a sense that this is perceived as a real bad crisis.
It depends which country, but yes, I think a lot of European media, I mean, there were a lot of European media on the border in the last few days. I'm about to write about it myself. I've just been trying to gather more material and make sure I have something to say. So I will write something in the next 2 or 3 days. But I mean, it's hard to understand, genuinely, because what you have is the Belarusian government using desperate people from the Middle East as a kind of weapon. We're going to bring all these people here. We're going to use them to break down your border. We're going to cause political problems. We're going to create havoc. We're going to create problems in Poland. We're going to create problems between Poland and Europe. It has some resemblance to the problems on the Mexican border, and there's some of the same legal and moral issues. What do you do with people who have, fled from one country, gone through 2 or 3 other countries, and then they arrive somewhere and they declare they want asylum? I mean, you have the same problem with Iraqi Kurds. I mean, they've come to Poland via Turkey, they've come via, Dubai, they've come via Belarus. Why should they get asylum in Poland or Germany? That's not how the rules work. And it's the same issues that you have with Central Americans arriving at the U.S.-Mexico border. But the added element is the deliberate creation of the problem. This is not a spontaneous. This problem didn't exist 2 months ago. It's been manufactured.
So I'm starting with Anne and then Toomas. I'm interested in your sense of what this is, what Lukashenko is weaponizing this in pursuit of. Is this about punishing Lithuania and Poland for support of the Belarusian opposition? Is it about forcing the EU, trying to force the EU to relax sanctions? Is it about doing Putin's bidding in some respect? Like, what's the game here?
I mean, I think all of the above. I mean, there are multiple games here. As I said, as you say, one is, I think the fact that these refugees were originally sent to Lithuania, which has been hosting the most important host of the Belarusian opposition, was seen immediately as a kind of response to that. But I do think, the Russians fund anti-immigration far-right parties all across Europe. So this is meant to be grist for their mill. The Russians have an interest in seeing Poland further isolated from the rest of Europe. This will help that case too. Lukashenko may want some kind of payback in the way it's perceived, not entirely correctly, that Erdogan got a kind of payback for taking refugees in Turkey. So, there may be multiple reasons why he's doing this, it's an interesting precedent for the future. That you can use refugees as a tool of politics. They aren't just some spontaneous problem that happens because there's a war or a crisis.
Toomas, what do you think? What's Lukashenko's game?
Well, everything that Anne said, but I think telling was, first of all, Foreign Minister Lavrov's statement day before, where he said, well, if you want to get rid of this, then, as Anne mentioned, pay Lukashenko money. And this is what in Russia is called a krysha, or a roof. In English, we call it extortion. I mean, this is classic Mario Puzo, Godfather behavior. I mean, that's what it is. The other thing I should mention, which I mentioned before we went live, was that, in fact, and one of the worries here, we lack a border with Belarus, but we do have a border with Russia, is that about 5 years ago, Russia did this, and it did it to Finland, and it did it to Norway, with the result that the Norwegians shut down their border, and in the case of Finland, they went and said, cut it out. So, I mean, we've seen it before, and we think it can happen again.
Sorry. So I got it. Okay. I was curious as to what, this question to both of you, what you think the United States can do. First, Anne, maybe you could take a stab at it. You're muted.
No.
Yeah, you were muted.
Now you're good.
Now you're good.
I didn't knowingly mute myself, but
I muted you because we all have to be muted when we're not talking.
Okay. The United States, which still, despite it all, is somehow perceived as the leader of the democratic world, I think can still make a difference as a leader. I even had a conversation with a senior U.S. diplomat who works on Belarus a few months ago, who said this to me, that she still has the feeling when she walks into the room, people look at her and expect her to tell everyone what we're going to do next. Convening a meeting, convening a conversation in which we say, okay, let's start to take this problem of Belarus seriously. Let's not just react every time they do something nutty. Let's have a list of companies and people who we're going to sanction. Let's have it ready at each stage of development. Let's tell the Belarusians in advance what we're going to do if they do X and Y. Let's have a plan if they're going to cut off the gas, which they at one point said that they were. Let's have an alternate, planning for this, understanding that we're now dealing with a set of countries. By the way, it's not just Belarus. I mean, you could look at Venezuela or Burma or Iran, or, there's a series of countries now in the world who have as part of their national interest the desire to screw up the Western or the democratic world, whatever word we're using now, having a long-term plan. How do we deal with these transnational crises? How do we deal with the problems when these countries reach across borders and seek to impose their nasty dictatorships or their nasty forms of repression on other people in other countries? We need a worked out plan in advance. We can't just react every time. Each time this thing happens, whether it's the Russians killing people in Salisbury in England, or in Berlin, which they did recently, or whether it's the Saudis murdering somebody, in a foreign embassy, or whether it's the Belarusians hijacking a plane. Each time it happens, we scramble around and look for a reaction. This is not a system. There needs to be a systematic response. There needs to be an understanding that this is these are tactics. They're being used by lots of people, and they have long-term goals. I've just written this. I have written about, and this is coming out on Monday, actually, in the Atlantic.
Okay. That's great. Before I move to Toomas, I'd just say I agree with what you said 1,000%. My colleague and I, Ona Hathaway, we proposed this thing in it, kind of parallel to the Security Council. We called it the Outcasting Council. That is a kind of like a representative group of nations where there's a plan in advance for like how you are going to be sanctioned for certain types of violations, egregious violations. If there's no sense that there's a procedure, that everything's ad hoc, you're creating an environment where people are going to abuse things. Toomas, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Ann.
No, I was just going to say. The second element, and this is a longer-term problem, is eradicating the influence of the autocracies inside our own countries, which is one of the reasons we don't have a plan. But that's a longer conversation.
Toomas?
There are a range of things. First of all, as far as ad hoc solutions go, apparently there is an effort by the European Union, which would be good if the United States were on board as well, as sanctioning those airlines. Right now, we're talking about Aeroflot and Turkish Airlines that are participating in this airlift, as it were. Belavia, the Belarus airline, is already sanctioned. And here again, basically the Irish were trying to block that because Belavia leases its planes from some Irish company, and that would mean a loss of income for an Irish company. This is where this national self-interest just rides over all of this stuff. And the way to think about it is kind of like the caveats in ISAF during the Afghan war. It's like, well, we can do this, but we won't do that. Now, what would be a major step forward, but this requires real serious work on the part of the EU, is that, believe it or not, there is no such thing as a Security Council in the European Union. We do have NATO, and the NAC, or the North Atlantic Council, meets daily, 7 days a week, if need be, to deal with crises, but they meet 5 days a week. But in the EU, we don't have a security structure built up that would actually deal with this. We have a fairly useless head of foreign and security policy, frankly, who does not really get it and is kind of stuck in hating the United States from his experiences during the Franco regime. But the European Union is, they were probably bad. I'm not arguing, but it's just that it's this is 2021. It's not like 1974. the EU is notoriously incapable of acting, partially because there are no structures for it, partially because of the same individual interest. I mean, we've seen this over and over with the behavior of Hungary in the EU, blocking proposals unanimously supported by other countries. Most recently, which Anne can talk about much more, which is the issue of cutting off funding for Poland for its steps back from rule of law and politicizing judges. So we have a perfect storm happening. I mean, if it were to be happening in Lithuania or Latvia, the two countries that also are suffering from this, I mean, Lithuanians say Frontex, that's the EU border guards, come on in. I don't know, Latvia, I guess the same. I mean, neither of those countries has any political issues on rule of law or any of these things. So, I mean, that's there the EU can step in fact, at least. But right now, this is coming, as Anne said, I mean, this is coming at a moment where as a member of the EU, Polish-EU relations are at a nadir.
So I want to ask about the supply side here. It seems to me one thing the US and the EU could do together without Polish cooperation is figure out how the information flow is working from the Belarusian government to a whole bunch of innocent Iraqi Kurds on the ground or whoever else. And, we have considerable communications abilities through the government of Iraq, through the Iraqi Kurdish Authority, through a bunch of the regional states. Why can't we, Anne, put out the message if Belarusians come bearing travel options, that is not a vacation you should take?
So that's one of the things that's been suggested. And actually, the leader of the German Greens said something about this just today. She was proposing as a solution to the crisis exactly that, an information campaign. I mean, one of the curious things that I've been told by, and by the way, those of you who are really interested in this, there's a fantastic short documentary. It's about 20 minutes. Called Visa to Nowhere, made by a group of Polish journalists called Outriders. It's got English subtitles and partly in English. And they go back and they interview people before they do this trip to Belarus, to Minsk, and to Poland. And of course, they all have very unrealistic expectations of what the trip will be like. And they have very high expectations of what they'll find, when they eventually get to their nirvana, in Dusseldorf or wherever it is that they're trying to go. And when presented with possible obstacles or reasons why this don't work, they kind of dismiss it and they say, well, I can't believe that's true. And we've been told by people who've been talking to the migrants that when they write on social media, notes back to people at home in Iraqi Kurdistan and say, don't come, they aren't believed. People say, oh, that's just propaganda. That's just European propaganda. You're trying to prevent us from coming. You've set yourself up already in Frankfurt and you're trying to prevent us from going. And the desire to believe that there is some way out or there's some magic solution is so strong that it overcomes even testimony from people who've already been through this really hellish process. And so, yes, having a full-on, government, involving religious leaders, business leaders, campaign to convince people not to do that is really one of the only ways to do it. Because even just simple messages from people who've been stuck on the Polish-Belarusian border for many days is not convincing to people who are still at home and who think this is the route that will get them to Germany.
Toomas.
Well, I posted on Twitter somewhere and I was looking for it, but I can't find it at the moment. But there is, in fact, independent Russian TV, that is non-state TV, has posted interviews with I guess people from the region. I don't know what nationality they are, about basically being brutalized by the Belarusian forces. I mean, making people who say they don't want to go to Poland sort of made to kneel, kicked in the face by Belarusian soldiers. It was very awful. It was really, really bad. So, I mean, those things maybe might help. There's an additional complicating factor here, which is that there's something called the Dublin Agreement in a protocol, whatever, I don't know, whatever the name is. But anyway, it's got Dublin in it, which was agreed to by the EU a number of years ago, which is that, and it was in response to people coming to the EU and all heading basically for either Germany, Sweden, or Finland, which are the countries with the best social welfare programs for anybody. And the Dublin Agreement basically says that the country you come to is the one where you must apply for asylum. So if you want asylum, you don't, I mean, since Germany is completely surrounded by other EU countries, theoretically it should mean that no one is even going to get to Germany. But the point is that these people, the other day there was a video of them at the border on the Belarus side yelling, "Germany, Germany, Germany," I guess implying that, no, we don't want to go to Poland, just let us through. I mean, I guess that's the message, because why would you be screaming Germany at the Polish border? The thing is, these people don't realize that Germany is not taking them in. I mean, Germany has border patrols on the Polish-German border now. We too have, I mean, there have been, I guess, 6 cases of people being, or groups, 6 groups, I guess, being stopped in Estonia by our border guards, where they're smuggling people from crossing the border, either in Latvia or Lithuania, to go to Finland, which, as I mentioned, is one of the 3 big sort of target countries for this movement. I saw David Priest here.
David Priest is indeed here, and we will get to him in a moment. We are going to go to audience questions. The first question from Andy McCurdy, who cannot come on screen. This was something that Toomas was talking about before we went live. How worried should we be about Russian troop buildup on the Ukrainian border? Toomas, what are your thoughts?
I would say a lot. I mean, if the United States is really worried, which basically the United States has downplayed earlier, the troop buildup in March and April was basically downplayed by the United States. So this is not like something new for the Biden administration, or it is something new for the Biden administration, meaning that, I mean, when we saw it last time, the U.S. was fairly kind of calm about it. Now the U.S. is not, and our folks, the ones I talked to, say that they do not recall the United States being this concerned, worried.
That is a cheerful answer to a cheerful question. What do you think, Anne? Is it should we be as alarmed as Toomas sounds?
You know, so the possibility that there would be another Russian attempt to invade Ukraine has really been with us since 2014. We've known it was a possibility. I mean, the Russians have published the maps of the new Ukrainian border that they want to see. They did that, already 7 years ago. And so we know that, the plan was never abandoned. It is concerning to me that the Biden administration thinks it's important enough to start warning European allies right now and this week. And I don't have, I don't have the, I don't have the data in front of me to tell you exactly why that's happening, but there's been this gradual troop buildup for some time. And at this time, in the past, there's usually been some kind of military exercise, or there's been some reason for it. And this time it appears to be happening for no known reason. And there's, of course, no political trigger at the moment either. And therefore, people are making this leap of assumption that there is some connection to this hysteria at the Polish border and this scenes of, Belarusians pushing migrants through the fence in an apparent attempt to create some kind of conflict, that may be some kind of distraction from something else. Maybe that's over conspiratorial, maybe that's overthinking it, but that's one of the reasons why people are so concerned.
Toomas?
Yeah, one of the things that the Russians, just their whole approach has been with sort of ethno-historical essays by Vladimir Putin and Dmitry Medvedev and Patrushev, all sort of beating this line that Ukraine is not a real country. They have to be taught a lesson. From a military point of view, what has been really hitting the Russians is that they failed to get a corridor connecting Crimea to Mother Russia, most importantly when it comes to the water reservoirs. So like places like Mariupol and so on that are there and are under constant bombardment and attack from the Russians, that they would want to take those places so they would be able to bring in water, fresh water to Crimea. I don't know. I mean, that's the logic of. That's military logic. I don't know what they're thinking. I mean, if we knew, then we wouldn't be in this problem. But there are certainly reasons to worry about how it all looks together with the rhetoric coming out of Russia, including the rhetoric that apparently CIA Director Burns ran into on his visit last weekend.
All right, Paula, the floor is yours. I tried to bring on David Priest, but it was an empty room. So you get to jump him in the queue.
Thank you. So my question is, what is the role of Germany as the country that is being offered as a place for these migrants, even though it might not have given that offer in the first place? And then attached to my question, someone asked, how does the end of the Merkel era change that calculus as well?
Great question. Toomas, you want to get us started on that?
Well, Germany hasn't offered anyone anything since 2015 when Angela Merkel took in almost 1 million people, and will not repeat that ever again because of the political fallout from that, not only domestically in Germany and feeding the hard right, but how that also fed anti-EU sentiment in hard right parties across Europe, from Finland down to Italy. So that will not happen. Germany has offered nothing in Germany, actually. On the other hand, Germany has been, its most recent behavior, on the bigger scene, is that they condemned Ukraine for using a drone for taking out an artillery battery with which the Russians had been killing people in Ukraine. This from a country that, sort of saying this is very bad, don't do this, we're, extremely concerned, blah, 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 whose own IG Metall built a training center for Russian Spetsnaz troops after the invasion of Crimea. So, they don't really have, you're looking at a rather mercantile state that basically, as long as we can sell to the Chinese, which is their big thing in the EU, as long as we can sell to the Germans, as long as we get this pipeline, screw ethics. Now, on the new government, it looks like Annalena Baerbock will become the foreign minister. The problem that we see with is that, for one, the foreign minister in Germany has been, after Genscher in the mid-90s, the foreign ministry deals with Latin America and development aid, and the political decisions come from the Bundeskanzleramt, or the chancellor's office. And that the SPD, while Scholz is a fairly centrist social democrat, he's got a whole bunch of hardcore anti-American, anti-NATO, pro-Russian people, young people in the SPD that are also in government, in parliament, so we don't know where it's going to go. And you could easily foresee a situation in which the foreign minister really is left to deal with development aid in Latin America.
And what do you think? Are we dealing with is Germany likely to? I mean, they don't even have a government right now, right?
So here's what Germany, in this sense, is a little bit like the United States, in that there are different sets of interests that have different foreign policies. A little bit like in America, sometimes what Congress does and what the White House does and what the business community does are all different. And in Germany, that's very similar. And there is a part of the German foreign policy establishment that would like there to be a clearer European foreign policy, and that that would like to push back harder against these things. And then there's another part that there's another part of the country that doesn't want that at all, and they're in constant conflict with another. I think it's important to know, and this is also, I just put the link in the chat. This film that I referred to, they actually go to Germany, to one of the shelters where people who have made it across Poland from Minsk are staying. And by the way, there's a lot of people. I mean, there's something like 9,000 now in Germany. So the Polish government, despite its show of force at the border and, millions of soldiers and, martial law in the border regions, actually people are getting through. And what do the Germans do? They process people, they put them in shelters for 10 weeks, and then they say they're going to send them back. And of course, the really humane thing to do in Poland would be something similar. Although I wouldn't make it 10 weeks, I would make it, 2 weeks. If you have a system whereby you accept people, you treat them like human beings, you don't make propaganda with them, you look at their credentials, have they met the legal requirements to be considered political asylum, to be given political asylum, and then you send them back. That, if you could do it quickly, then that would make a lot of sense. And that seems to be what the Germans intend to do about this problem.
David Priest, proprietor of the new podcast from Lawfare, Chatter. The floor is yours.
Thank you. And Toomas, both of you, thanks for joining us for this. This is great. I have not been tracking this closely. In fact, I've only been a lot of the details through your tweets, Toomas. So thank you for that. But that means that I feel like I understand the regional dynamic as well as I should. And in particular, all I'm seeing from most countries in Europe are expressions of concern and disappointment. And I'm wondering if you're seeing signs that any EU countries are likely to move beyond this kind of, bloviating, rhetoric, and instead actually look to take concrete measures.
Well, I don't know. We have the foreign minister should be meeting any day now. Whether it's tomorrow or Monday, I don't know. At least Ursula von der Leyen, chair, and also Charles Michel, the head of the Commission and the head of the EU Council, have both been tougher on this than they have previously been. but we're still at the level of rhetoric. I assume that there is constant work going on at the moment at the level of ambassadors in Coreper, which is like the foreign policy body where they meet to discuss stuff, but everything, on preparing sanctions, finding out the lay of the land, who was for what, and objections from certain countries. So I assume that's what's going on. I haven't seen anything yet, and so it's the European Union is not a sort of real powerful actor when it comes to these kinds of issues, especially when there's something as contentious as offering your own company's well-being to stand up for human rights issues. It's kind of not a great track record.
It's sure great at regulating U.S. privacy policy, though. So I want to ask Anne about some of the ideological divisions here, because from a a sort of U.S. democratic West perspective, the philosophical lines that separate Lukashenko from the Justice and Development Party in Poland, or excuse me, the Orban people, are non-obvious, and yet they are, while the Justice and Development folks and Orban's people are reasonably aligned, Lukashenko is very much on the other side of some line, and I guess I'm trying to understand what that line is.
So first of all, it's the Law and Justice Party in Poland.
Oh, sorry.
And you, as lawfare, should appreciate the name.
Yes, sorry. My humble apologies to the Law and Justice Party of Poland for thinking that instead of...
if it were Justice and Development, we might feel differently about it, but it's not.
That's right. I'm sorry, guys. I mean, President or Prime Minister Kaczynski, please forgive me.
Yeah, and that's very important, because this is the main thing, the sort of central ideology of this party is that, and the main achievement they've had in the last several years is their attempt to undermine the legal system in Poland, to eliminate the Polish equivalent of the Supreme Court, to politicize the justice system.
Hey, the Ministry of Truth is responsible for lies.
It's an ironic, name at this point, and that's important to know. But your point is really interesting, because of course there are the differences between Fidesz in Hungary and Law and Justice in Poland and Lukashenko in Belarus. There are differences of degree. I mean, the Poles don't lock people up or torture them, not yet. And so there's no brutality in either Poland and Hungary on the scale that there is now in Belarus. So I think we should be clear that those are very different systems. Poland still has a real opposition. It has opposition media and so on. So it's not a dictatorship. But of course, the amusing thing is that at another level, you're right. But of course, the difference between these these are all nationalist parties. So, there are Belarusian nationalists and Polish nationalists and Hungarian nationalists. And so, of course, they don't like each other. I mean, there's, they're fighting over borders. They're fighting over, who's in charge of what. I mean, that's what nationalists have always done. I mean, that's why wars used to start, was because you had, one nationalist party pitted against another one. And so what you're seeing is the reemergence of traditional kinds of competition between ruling parties who see, although I should say that these are particular kinds of nationalists. So the Law and Justice Party is not a party that is acting in the interests of all of Poland. In fact, you could argue that it's not doing that at all. It's acting in the interests of its leaders and their domestic political prospects. And the same, of course, is true in Belarus, and the same is true in Hungary. It's about a ruling clique that wants to retain power and is seeking to use an international conflict as a way to keep itself in power. And actually, that's the interesting thing. That's what all these kinds of political parties have in common everywhere. I mean, it's what theocrats in Iran and communists in Cuba and, nationalists in Russia, this is what they have in common. But this is, of course, also why they come into conflict with one another, because, once your not even national interests, once your personal clan interests are in conflict with another group's personal clan interests, it creates a conflict.
Is it fair to say, Anne, that these are all the parties that Steve Bannon would run if he were a national of Poland or Hungary or Belarus? Yes.
This is the kind of political movement that he, in his madness, seeks to create, a kind of a movement that is based around the idea that you can divide people according to who we hate and who we don't hate, who are patriots and who are traitors. These are populist authoritarian movements. And again, there are big differences in degree. And I actually, although I'm very critical of both the Polish and Hungarian governments, I don't think it's fair to compare them directly to Lukashenko. But there is a trajectory on which they could eventually end up there, although they have not yet.
Toomas.
I was going to say that leading to the bizarre phenomenon of Steve Bannon trying to create a nationalist international, stymied. I mean, no kidding. I mean, stymied by the Italian government not letting him buy or rent a monastery in northern Italy last year. I mean, but the idea was to draw them all together, the Le Pens and the Salvinis, and I mean, it's just the concept is so bizarre. But yeah, I mean, what does unify them, other than being nationalist, is some kind of bizarre adherence to homophobia and basically legislating morality. These days, since COVID, also objections to vaccination. I mean, this is the whole thing that's been going on, and of course, it's completely cynical. I tweeted this, I guess, Monday or last Friday, but there was this great thing in the Russian state TV when Russia is like in a total disaster with COVID deaths. Saying, everyone must vaccinate it, and saying, if you don't vaccinate, you will be fired. It was in Russian. In German, RT Germany said, do not vaccinate. This will poison you. So, I mean, this is the same. They're both, I mean, these are both outlets of the same propaganda machine of one single state. But, it works. It gets, I mean, people follow this stuff.
Scott.
So, to what extent do you, we talked about the Russian-Ukraine border issue, which is in danger of being a military confrontation. But to what extent is there any danger of military confrontation between Belarus and Poland?
Danger.
And what would that look like, Anne?
I mean, the danger right now is that it looks something like this. Belarusian guards push 400 people across the border and follow behind them. Polish troops, a lot of really young, badly trained border guards are on the other side. They start by shooting in the air. They don't know what to do next, and they shoot at someone in the crowd or at the Belarusians, and they kill somebody. And this is, by the way, I mean, this kind of scenario, this kind of hybrid war scenario has been played out and has been imagined in various different ways as preceding a Russian invasion in the Baltic states and elsewhere for many years. And so it's not it's not entirely new idea. But, you know, the idea that some incident could be deliberately used to spark an armed conflict is exactly what's in the center of attention here in Poland right now. And again, we're talking about, you know, normally the Eastern Polish border guard. I mean, I was just down there. These are people who, these are really nice jobs. They are, you know, state pensions, you know, jobs for life, early retirement. You know, it's a region with a lot of unemployment. People love these jobs. You don't really have to do very much. You don't have to work very hard. This is not a group of people who are trained for some kind of intense conflict or whoever believed they would expect it. I mean, these are mostly, you know, people who thought they would spend their days, you know, writing reports and filling in papers and maybe walking up and down the border a bit. Some of the, you know, and so the idea that there could be some mass event that would, you know, that would create a violent reaction and then another violent reaction is exactly what's at the top of everybody's minds right here.
I think we should leave it there out of courtesy to our guests who have to go to bed. Anne Applebaum, you're a great American, a great Brit, and a great Pole. Toomas Ilves, you're a great Estonian statesman and a great American as well. We will see you both. Thank you both for staying up late to help us sift through all this stuff. We will be back tomorrow with my uncle, John Turk, who has a new book out. He's been exploring places that you've never thought of and drawing political conclusions from them, which is what he does. He is actually going to be in a place this time where he can appear on screen. There'll be enough, you know, not a shack in Montana where Ted Kaczynski might once have lived. That'll be 23 hours and 2 minutes from now. And until then, Scott?
We can't have fun anymore. And I'm sorry, this is going to be a downer, but we can, I was going to say, use civilian populations as weapons, but that doesn't work.
Well, thank God for that.